Comic elements in the birthday party by Harold Pinter. Written by Ohidur. Plenty of comedy. Almost every character contributes to the humor of the play in a greater or lesser measure. Maximum contribution made by Goldberg and Meg. Humor provided by Meg is totally unconscious, she is not aware, she is a source of amusement to anybody. But Goldberg is a witty man capable of making sarcastic remarks which amuse us. McCann too is capable of making sarcastic remarks which amuse us. McCann too is capable of sarcasm. Stanley is another character who can make witty remarks, and he does make a few amusing statements in the course of the interrogation to which he is subjected by Goldberg and McCann. Humor provided by Lulu is again of the unconscious variety, amuses us by being made the target of ridicule by Goldberg and also by McCann. Not appropriate to describe the play as a comedy. However, abundance of comedy does not mean the play can be called a comedy. Play has certain very serious implications. Central character, Stanley, undergoes harrowing experiences. He meets a cruel fate which rouses both terror and pity in our hearts. On the whole, therefore, the play is a tragedy rather a comedy, but the most appropriate label for it is the comedy of Menace. An amusing dialogue between Meg and Patty. Play opens with an amusing dialogue between Meg and her husband Patty, because it is inconsequential, repetitions, and trivial. Minus 2/3 times Meg asks her husband a question that answer to which is obvious, and which therefore need not have been asked at all. Apart from a repetition of this question, the word nice is repeated several times in the course of this dialogue. Reference to an item of news in the newspaper makes this dialogue even more amusing. Inconsequential dialogue continues till Patty informs his wife, a couple of men would be coming to their boarding house to spend a couple of nights there. Only important bit of information this initial dialogue proves to Meg and to us. An amusing dialogue between Meg and Stanley. Then we have a dialogue between Meg and her lodger Stanley, again trivial and almost meaningless. However, it is amusing enough. When Stanley uses the word succulent, Meg takes it to mean, he regards her as a sexy woman. When she asks him to say sorry first before she can give him some tea, he repeats the words, sorry first. When she says, he should say just sorry, he repeats both the words, saying, just sorry. She thereupon says, he deserves to be caned, like a schoolboy. Again amused when Stanley describes Meg as a succulent old washing bag. An amusing dialogue between Lulu and Stanley. Dialogue between Stanley and Lulu, another comic piece. When Lulu suggests, Stanley should have taken a wash because he looks terrible without it, he replies, a wash wouldn't make any difference. When Stanley suggests, she should go away with him and she wants to know where they should go, he replies, nowhere. Still, we could go. On her asking again where they can go, he gives the following amusing reply, nowhere. There's nowhere to go. So we could just go. Lulu eventually leaves after saying, Stanley is a bit of a washout. Meg's garbled version of Stanley's account of his concerts. Although all these dialogues are amusing, we cannot say, examples of any sparkling or uproarious comedy. Comedy here is of a very trivial kind. We get slightly better comedy when Meg gives to Goldberg a garbled version of Stanley's account of two piano concerts, one, which had proved very successful while the other had not even materialized. Here the comedy arises from Meg's muddle-headedness and her failure either to have understood Stanley's account or to remember it correctly. Meg had not even correctly understood the sense in which Stanley had used the word tip to move so that one side is higher than another side, to pour a substance from one container into another or onto a surface. Amusing bits in the dialogues between Stanley and McCann. Then, at the beginning of Act 2, there is a long dialogue between Stanley and McCann which is amusing in parts. When McCann says, it is an honor for him to have been invited to Stanley's birthday party, Stanley says, McCann is exaggerating. When McCann insists, if it is an honor, Stanley says, he regards his view as plain stupid. When Stanley wants to go out of doors, McCann insists, Stanley should stay where he is. We are greatly amused when Stanley, in an effort to send the two men away, says, "The landlady of his boarding house is crazy, round the bend, that she is mad." We are again amused when Stanley poses to be the manager of this boarding house and when he says, actually no accommodation is available for the two men and they must leave. Stanley's effort to befriend McCann by praising Ireland and the Irish people is also a part of the fun here. Then there is a bit of comedy in the way in which the two men again and again ask Stanley to sit down while he refuses to pay any heed to them. However, the comedy here has a hint of menace too. The comic aspect of the two men's interrogation of Stanley. Interrogation to which Stanley is subjected by the two men is also amusing in parts. Some questions asked by them are really funny. Following bit of dialogue is an example of the comedy here, though the comedy arises more from Stanley's answers than from the questions asked. A short conversation between Goldberg and Stanley. When did you come to this place? Last year. Where did you come from? Somewhere else. Why did you come here? My feet hurt. Why did you stay? I had a headache. Did you take anything for it? Yes. What? Fruit salts. A couple of questions in the interrogation are mutually contradictory and therefore amusing. Stanley is first asked why he had killed his wife, then why he had never got married. Some other amusing questions are, why don't you pay the rent? Why do you pick your nose? How many fingers do you use while playing the piano? Question why the chicken crossed the road is also quite funny, while the question whether the chicken came first or the egg came first is partly comic and partly philosophical. The comedy in the dialogue at the birthday party. Goldberg's compliments to Meg, when he admires her bearing or deportment, the way a person walks and stands or behaves, and when he compares her to a tulip and a gladiolus. The tulip and the gladiolus are kinds of flowers, are also a part of the comedy, as is her vanity in asking Stanley what he thinks of her dress. When McCann asks whether Meg has ever been to Carrickmacross, she gives a reply which is, unintentionally on her part, quite amusing. Her reply is, I've been to King's Cross. Carrickmacross is the name of an Irish town, while King's Cross is the name of a railway station in London. Humour here arises from the incongruity between the question and the answer, but, of course, Meg is perfectly unconscious of the fact. Her answer is amusing. Humour provided by Meg elsewhere in the play is also unconscious on her part. Some of the dialogue between Goldberg and Lulu during the birthday party is also amusing, as are the reminiscences of Lulu and Meg, both of whom recall their childhood days. Then there is some fun in the game of blind man's buff which they all play. Comedy at the beginning of Act 3. Act 3 initial dialogue between Meg and Patty, which reminds us of their dialogue at the opening of Act 1, is again amusing because of its triviality and inconsequentiality. Further, we feel amused when Meg becomes nervous on seeing a big car parked outside the boarding house, because she is reminded of Stanley's warning to here. Some people would come in a van and bring a wheelbarrow with them. There is a touch of comedy in the feeling of uneasiness which McCann experiences, and also in Goldberg's plight when he feels completely devitalized and is almost unable to talk coherently. Here we feel amused by the contrast between Goldberg's claim he has always enjoyed good health and his present condition in which he thinks it necessary to ask McCann to blow into his mouth. Goldberg's witty remarks to Lulu. Dialogue between Lulu and Goldberg is really very amusing because of the witty answers which Goldberg gives to Lulu's accusations against him. When Lulu says, her first lover, Eddie, never behaved like Goldberg because Eddie had never come into her room at night with a briefcase, Goldberg wittingly asks who had opened the briefcase, he or she. When she complains, Goldberg had used her for a night as a mere passing fancy. Goldberg asks who had used whom, implying it was he who had been used by her for her own satisfaction. When she complains, he had made use of her by cunning when her defenses were down. Goldberg asks who had taken down those defenses, thus implying she had surrendered to him of her own free will. When Lulu complains, Goldberg had taught her things which a girl should not know before she has been married at least 3 times. Goldberg replies, She has now acquired much more experiences of sexual intercourse and that she should therefore have no grouse and angry complaint against him. Not only are Goldberg's sarcastic answers amusing, but the way in which Lulu makes her complaints is amusing also, because we know she had herself been encouraging Goldberg to fondle her at the party. Comic moments in the second brainwashing exercise. Second session of the brainwashing to which Stanley is subjected by the two men also has its comic moments. Another conversation by Goldberg and McCann. Stanley has been cockeyed for years. Stanley is now even more cockeyed. Stanley has gone from bad to worse. Worse than worse. Stanley needs a change of air somewhere beyond that rainbow. Stanley needs a change of air at a place where angels would fear to tread. Stanley is in a rut period of the year during which particular male animals, especially deer and sheep, are sexually active. Stanley looks anemic without any energy and effort. Stanley looks rheumatic. Stanley is myopic, not able to see clearly things that are far away. Thus the brainwashing goes on, becoming more and more comic, even though the effect of it on Stanley would be disastrous. Towards the end of the brainwashing, two men make some very fantastic and preposterous promises which amuses us by their very absurdity or extravagance. Unconscious humor at the end. Play closes with a bit of comedy which is unconsciously provided by Meg when she tells Patty she was the Bella Beautiful girl of the ball or dance. Meg replies, "Oh yes. They all said I was." Patty then agrees with her and says, "I bet you were, too." And Meg says that she surely was. Comedy of Menace in the Birthday Party by Harold Pinter. A sense of danger accompanying the audience's laughter. David Campton, 1957, in the subtitle of his play The Lunatic View, the laughter of the audience immediately followed by a feeling of some impending disaster. Audience feels uneasy even while laughing because of its perception of some threat, explicit/implicit, potential violence, actual violence, underlying sense of violence, feeling of uncertainty, insecurity, nervousness. Amusing dialogues followed by one suggestive of menace. Meg informs Stanley of two gentlemen for a couple of nights. Stanley disturbed and warns Meg of throwing dust into her eyes. Stanley impresses Meg, ex-pianist/job/concert. First concert utterly successful, but second one wasn't held. Antagonistic, the reference to a van and a wheelbarrow. Stanley scares Meg, childish fear a dead body would be taken away by wheelbarrow. Meg's dying/Stanley's departure, a joke. Pinter's art of mingling comedy with menace. A knock at the door, apprehension followed by mirth. The sudden knock frightens, as Stanley said, actually Lulu to deliver a parcel to Meg. Startles Meg/Stanley/audience followed by feeling of relief, amusement. Lulu disappointed and thought Stanley to be a bit of a washout. The menace resulting from the reference to the job. Goldberg knows the details of the job, hides from McCann. Our anxiety followed immediately by amusement. Meg returns from shopping and asked about Stanley. Goldberg's inquisitiveness about this lodger. Stanley makes up anxious. Please subscribe to my channel. Thanks for watching.